Hello and welcome to the Jewess Believer Radio Show. Join us in the kitchen as we Jewess believers share what we were taught growing up with our Jewish bubby. We combine family recipes with biblical truths and health tips to highlight the Hebrew and Greek culture. We are just a bunch of Mediterranean foodies who love Yeshua. So come join us as we dig a little deeper into biblical culture, health, and wisdom.
Shalom, my friends. Thank you for joining me, Jessica Stern Foster, in the Jewess Believer Kitchen here on the Chesapeake shores of Maryland. As I sit here with my hot red rose tea, let's dig a little deeper. This week, we're going to be talking a little bit more about food and the word of the Lord, talking about the land of milk and honey. Honey is one of the most ancient foods known to mankind, has over the millennia morphed into the symbol of all things sweet. And let's face it, no Rosh Hashanah table should be without this delicacy to help celebrants wish each other a sweet and happy new year. But the Hebrew word for honey, davash, means more than just the product we borrow from bees. In antiquity, it means the sweet juice of almost any fruit. That explains how honey was included in the 7 spices of the land of Israel: wheat and barley, and vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of olive trees and honey. That's found in Deuteronomy 8:8. Since honey is obviously not a plant like the other 6, scholars believe that this was a reference to the sweet fluids of dates. The relative word davash and the Arabic word dabis means grape juice, sometimes pomegranate juice. It is often said that the description of the land of Israel as flowing with milk and honey. It's mentioned 21 times in the Bible. Did it refer to honeybees? And was it a way to poetically depict an uncultivated land and wildflowers blossomed freely? We generally accept and receive the definition of milk and honey as a metaphoric meaning all things good. The Lord's blessings and the promised land must have been a land extraordinary. Spring is the season that recalls the biblical image of a perfect land so fertile its green hills flow with honey dripping from its hives like liquid gold in the sunlight. A spacious land covered with pink hawthorn, red clementine, and white rock horse. There are the flowers of its myriad wild fruits, and warm valley air smelling of their nectar. And gushing somehow from the land itself, there are springs of pure milk white as snow, and bright streams of it flowing through the hills. An eternal, vibrant earth is flowing out in her fruitful cycle of multiplication. It is, according to the Bible, a beauty of all, a paradise whose people would lack nothing. This curious supernatural image is evoked every year in the spring by celebrations of the Exodus, which for millennia have alluded to the land flowing with milk and honey, the divine destination of a people fleeing slavery to the promised land. We interrupt for a quick Babietza. These are simply recipes from the Jewess Believer Kitchen with practical advice on the preparation and cooking techniques that have been used by my family for generations. One amazing recipe that I absolutely loved growing up with my bubby was a simple butter and honey. Now, when I was really little, I would wake up when I was at Bubby's house and I would go to the kitchen table, and I remember specifically she had some challah left over, and it was Sunday morning. Of course, we have Shabbat on Saturdays, and she would slice the challah, and instead of putting it in the toaster because it was a bit too thick for the old-fashioned toasters, she would put it in the oven on the rack to toast, and she would pull it out and put it on a nice little dish that had a little green flour trim, and she would pull out the fresh homemade whipped butter, and I would put that butter on. And as I got older, she would see that I would always go to the honey jar, and the honey was in a jar, and we had the little comb that we'd pull out, and we would spread the honey on our bread with the butter. As I got older, she would show me how I could make my own honey butter, which was even more amazing. So I would take a couple of the scoops of the fresh whipped butter. She would leave it out so it would get soft before we put it on our fresh challah or our fresh toast or whatever she made, yummy and tasty. And she would give me a little dish. I'd put my butter in, and then I would add whatever amount of honey, however I wanted it, thicker or creamier, and I would take a fork and I would mash in the honey, and I would use the fork like a whisk. And then I could take and spread that honey butter on my fresh homemade challah. Talk about a sweet, tasty treat where you can teach your kids right at the breakfast table or the kitchen table, right in your own home, just like my bubby did with me when I was little. That's it for this quick Bubbietza. Questions about the particular significance of milk and honey involve literary archaeology, and such pursuit reveals the different layers of meaning these ancient fertility symbols gained as they were adopted and assimilated by different early cultures in the Middle East. For us, milk and honey originates from the Hebrew Bible in the Lord's description of the country lying between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River, namely Canaan. It's first described as good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and in all this way alone when the Lord commissions Moses to lead the Israelites to it. We generally accept and receive the definition of milk and honey as metaphoric, meaning all good things. The Lord's blessings and that of the promised land must have been in a land of extraordinary fertility. The phrase flowing with milk and honey is understood to be hyperbolically descriptive to the land's richness. Hence, it currently uses to express an abundant, a pure means of enjoyment. So the word davash, meaning honey, a striking feature of honey's legacy in Jewish culture is that, as a testament to the high value put on this particular food, the interpreters of the Jewish dietary laws have apparently made a dispensation for it. These biblical laws reflect the general principle that anything taken from an unclean animal, such as bees, is forbidden. The classic teaching found in the rabbinical literature is that bees do not produce honey, but simply transport the nectar to flowers and store it as honey in their hives. Modern science, however, recognizes that bees actually do produce it, producing nectar in their bodies with enzymes. To argue for honey's acceptance, one early rabbi cites the Lord's own use for it in his praise of Canaan. So basically, as my bubby says, tradition preserves the forbidden fruit of the bee's labor as a divine blessing, and it maintains its enduring sacred nature. So basically saying, honey is good, honey is a blessing, and something amazing for your bodies given to us from the Lord through bees. So when considering the significance of honey for the Israelites, we must bear in mind that in the Bible, there is no implication that it is a cultivated product. Beekeeping was developed by them many centuries later. The biblical bees were certainly wild bees, and various other references made to their honey would indicate that it was considered public property. Wild bees living in the hollow trunks of dead trees and in the protected nooks of rock formations produce honey long before apiculture was invented. In nature, fertile land produces honey by itself and can be seen flowing quite literally with it. One clear implication of the presence of abundant wild honey is the existence of ample water and fertile soil that nectar-producing flowers require. An abundance of wild honey would generally imply other describable conditions about a land and its climate that peoples dependent on the earth's fertility for their survival would value. Surely the ancient observers that honey was the most plentiful in the areas where their livestock produced the most milk. In these same pastures, rich in greens for grazing, would grow an abundance of flowers for bees. Not surprisingly, milk and honey figure predominantly in the oldest cultures of regions of the Middle East. For example, the Egyptians, who kept bees as long as, 5,000 years ago, sweetened their foods and wines with it. They also valued honey for its medical virtues and for their ability to preserve fruits. They used it as an embalming material, and they even used it in wedding ceremonies and as a gift for a love portion that they would give somebody as a gift. The Egyptians, moreover, used honey and milk in their religious rituals in the funeral ceremonies performed. Honey was considered the lord of offerings and celestial foods, for it is sweet to the heart. It opens the flesh, knits together the bones, gathers together all the parts of the body. Egyptian royalty were embalmed with pots of honey found unspoiled by modern archaeologists to help ensure their resurrection into other worlds and their afterlife. But we know that our eternal grace is found in the Lord Jesus Christ and Yeshua as our Savior.
Shalom and greetings, everyone. This is Diamond, a sous chef here at the Jewish Believer. I hope you're enjoying the show. Here is an awesome recipe on apple honey topping. Peel and chop 8 small apples into a medium-sized pot. Add 1 tablespoon of lemon juice, 1 cup of honey, and 2 teaspoons of cinnamon. Mix well and place it on your stovetop. Next, set the temperature on low and cook it for 3 to 4 hours. After the 3 to 4 hours are up, put in 1 tablespoon of cornstarch to thicken it. Mix well and wait about 5 to 10 minutes before taking it off the heat to cool. After it's cooled, you can put it on anything, like cake, ice cream, and even on toast. Now back to the Jewish Believer with Jessica Stern Foster.
Now, in the earliest cultures of the Middle East, honey was viewed as a gift of a divine origin. The ancient Semites attributed its presence as godliness and fertility of love. So basically, honey is revered by every aspect of something good and sweet. Clearly, the biblical image of milk and honey has its heritage in the most basic survival needs. So in Deuteronomy 26:9, the Israeli Bible says, "He brought us to this place and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey." So while countless studies consistently show that honeybees are dying out in the U.S. and in Europe, they're continually flourishing in Israel, which validates biblical description of Israel as being the land with blossoming fruits and flowers with milk and honey. Now, you might ask, what is this called? The collapse of colony disorder, or the colony collapse disorder, CCD, was first observed in France in 1994 when the United States started having this issue in 2006. Now, it has since been found throughout Europe and North America. More than 25% of the managed honeybees population have disappeared in the United States since 1990. This is kind of scary because honeybees, there's about 1,400 species that have been studied, and more than half are on the decline and near extinction. Now, why is this important to share? The disappearance of honeybees poses a serious threat to the cultivation of crops that 90% of wild plants, as well as farmers that are dependent on insect pollination, as honeybees are the world's primary pollinators and are essential component to functioning ecosystems. They're important to crops such as apples, berries, cantaloupes, cucumbers, alfalfa, and almonds, and it goes on and on and on. Crop population, literally, depletion of bees could kill off a whole ecosystem and people would start starving. But in Israel, it's a land promised to flow with milk and honey. Damage to hives is pretty much non-existent. Despite use of the same pesticides shown, we are finding and hearing that this is not an issue for Israel. In Isaiah 35:1, it says, "The arid desert shall be glad, the wilderness shall rejoice and shall blossom like a rose." I have some friends who live in the arid desert, and they send pictures, and it looks like just milk flowing through the fields, and it's from a flower that blossoms, a white flower, and it literally spreads in the spring, and it looks like milk flowing, and then you'll see the glistening of honey in between, which is the sands shining through the flowers. It is a beautiful sight. Without bees, Israel could not blossom, and the prophecy of redemption could not be fulfilled. As empires have rose and empires have fallen, the Babylonians and the Assyrians and the Persians accumulated immense wealth and power that allowed them to build capital cities of striking beauty. Their cities and palaces eventually fell in decay and were covered by thousands of years of sand and dust. One of their relatively powerless contemporary groups outlined those empires. These people were known as the Hebrews and then known as the Israelites, or later the Jews. Their early contribution to mankind was not wealthy empires or groundbreaking technologies, but rather it was a voluntary idea that there was only one God, one Lord, or this belief is known as monotheism. This one Hebrew God is called Yahweh. To the Hebrews, Yahweh is all-powerful and all-knowing, yet beyond human understanding, the religion base around this monotheism influenced the founding of Christianity and Islam. Of course, a land flowing with milk and honey, the health of the land depends on our responsible behavior. One of the best recognized descriptions of the land of Israel, of course, is a land flowing with milk and honey, found in Deuteronomy 31:20. This description immediately conjures up the picture of a rich, fertile, and desirable land, but what do the words actually mean? And the environmental implications are alluded to in this expression. When we started our interpretation of talking about the land flowing with milk and honey, we talked about the fields and the flowers. We spoke about the honey and the honeybees. As milk flows from the goats and honey flows from the figs, for a pastoral people, this indeed must have been an inviting description of the land. The goats were a source of milk as well as meat, and they were prolific. In biblical times, goats were a reflection of wealth. How surprisingly, in the land of milk and honey, the Jewish sages later instituted a ban on the raising of small livestock, such as goats and sheep, in the land of Israel, at least in the settled areas. When Jehovah delivered the Israelites out of Egypt, he promised to bring them to a land good and spacious, to that land flowing with milk and honey, Exodus 3:8. As the Israelites settled in the promised land, they raised cows, sheep, and goats, thus having an abundant supply of milk. What though about honey? Some believe that the expression refers to the sweet syrup made from dates, figs, or grapes, and most of the specific Bible references to the honeybees is to wild honey, and that's not a cultivated crop. So archaeologists have found in modern-day Israel there provides a clearer picture of a discovery the Hebrew University press release stated. This is the earliest apparel, the beehive colony, to be revealed to date archaeological excavation anywhere in ancient Near East. It dates from the 10th and 9th centuries BCE. The archaeologists found that more than 300 bees in 3 rows, and they estimated that the total area would have contained some 100 beehives. Studies of the beehives have found parts of bees' bodies and beeswax modulars in the remains. Scholars estimate as much as half a ton of honey would be culled each year from these hives. In ancient times, not only was honey a delicious food, but it was beeswax, and beeswax was used in the metal and leather industries. Another use was for writing boards made of wood panel with the recesses filled with beeswax. Such could be melted down for reuse. What conclusion did the archaeologists draw to this discovery? While the Bible tells us nothing about beekeeping in Israel at the time, the current ecological study and discovery of the beehives indicates that beekeeping and the extraction of bees' honey and honeycomb was a highly developed industry as early as the First Temple period of Solomon's First Temple. Thus, it is possible that the term honey in the Bible does indeed pertain to the honeybees. Now, a quick insight from my bubby. She would say to me the reason why honeybees and honey was included in the 7 spices is because the honeybees would pollinate all sorts of different plants and thus have the nectar and proteins and vitamins from all of those plants that would combine and be cultivated into the nectar of honey. Isn't it amazing how while the 7 spices, we have all these plants, but yet in the cultivation of honey, we have many plants cultivated into a sweet nectar. So here's a quick Babietza. There are some key benefits to using raw honey. Since raw honey naturally contains nutrients and enzymes that have a variety of healthy benefits and medical uses. Perhaps that's why it has been used as a remedy by my bubby and family for generations. Today, honey is still a popular food and is even used in some hospitals as a medical treatment for wounds. However, these health benefits are specific to unpasteurized honey. Manufacturers possess most of the honey you find in grocery stores. Heating the honey helps improve the color and texture, and it removes any unwanted crystallization. Many of the beneficial antioxidants and bacteria are also removed or destroyed in the process. If you're interested in trying raw honey, buy some from a trusted local honey beekeeper. You may want to check out your local farmer's market. That's it for this quick Babietza. Some types of honey have many antioxidants as fruits and vegetables. Antioxidants help to protect your body from cell damage due to free radicals. Free radicals contribute to the aging process and may also contribute to the developing of chronic disease such as cancer and heart disease. Studies show that polyphenols of honey may play a role in preventing heart disease. Raw honey can kill unwanted bacteria and funguses. It naturally contains hydrogen peroxide, an antiseptic. Several hospitals in Europe have used this type of honey to fight diseases such as staph bacterial infection that's become resistant to antibiotics. The effectiveness of honey and its antibacterial or antifungal depends on the type of honey. There is a special type of raw honey called manuka that is used in medical settings to treat wounds because of its effective germ killer. Researchers believe that this is because it is an additional bacteria properties besides the natural hydrogen peroxide. Studies show that manuka honey can produce healing time and reduce infections in wounds. However, the honey used in hospital settings is a medical grade, meaning it's safe and sterile. You shouldn't expect to treat injuries with honey you buy from your local grocery store. Raw honey is sometimes used to treat digestive issues. Although there isn't much research to show how it works, my bubby would often say that a teaspoon of honey can cure all. I believe it was Mary Poppins in the popular Walt Disney movie that sang, "A spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down." This phrase originated from the folk medical practices of midwives. While it was originally honey and not sugar, the Mary Poppins movie made this spoonful of sugar quite popular. However, it's proven that honey is effective as a treatment for common ulcers. Such ulcers occur in the stomach or digestive systems. Taking 1 to 2 teaspoons on an empty stomach is said to soothe pain and, help with the healing process. My bubby always said that since ancient times, honey has been used as both a food and a medicine. The Torah even describes the land of Israel as the land of milk and honey. As a verse in our Hebrew grace after meals even refers to the 7 spices of Israel, of the fruit and the grain, including, last but not least, honey. While the other 6 spices are plant-based, honey is still included in the list of the 7 spices from the land of Israel, found in Deuteronomy 31:20. It is a highly beneficial plant compound and offers several health benefits. Honey is particularly healthy when used instead of refined sugar, which is 100% empty calories. The bees collect sugar, mainly the sugar-rich nectar and flowers, from their environment. As we learn more about honey, we learn that honey may be high in some plant compounds. My bubby believed that this is the reason why the Lord included honey as the 7th spice in the land of Israel.
Thank you for joining us around the Jewess Believer Kitchen Table with Jessica Stern Foster. Like what you heard? Join us at thejewessbeliever.com. That's JEWESS, and pass it along to friends and family. Be sure to check out our page link for an archive of previous shows. You can also find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at the Jewess Believer. Join us for our next chat around the Jewess Believer Kitchen Table, where we will dig a little deeper into our heritage, faith, health, foodie love, and a wealth of biblical truths. Until then, Shana Tova and Shalom.